Hello, Gemma Liberty Lion. This is the federal constitution for the federal government. Uh, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, we're talking about lands. Jurisdiction is always attached to lands and the people on those lands. Now, I say that the federal constitution gives two lands, and those two lands are the seat of government and the places purchased for forts. So there's various types of forts. So we have forts, but they also list magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. But these lands for forts are for military purposes, which we also called posts. So there's posts up here, post offices and post roads, which many people believe are the United States post offices where we send mail. I don't agree. There's nothing in the Constitution about mail. The military has its own mail office. They have many, many different types of post offices on military posts, and they have different roads, generally specific roads on um, military posts. Okay, so here, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, become the seat of government. That's one land where they have exclusive legislative jurisdiction over all cases whatsoever. So this is their Justice Department is different from Article 3, Justice in the federal Constitution. So they have um, exclusive legislation over all cases over such district because they're supposed to be military, in my opinion. And I've gone over that several times under the qualifications for senators and representatives, and also for the president who has a White House on the federal land. He stays there. He's supposed to stay there all the time. If he's not there, somebody else is supposed to be there to take his place, just like in the military. But then we have this other type of land where it's like authority because these lands are inside the individual states, which are free, sovereign, and independent with all rights, powers, and jurisdictions not given to the United States. So the United States is the seat of government, and certain lands set apart inside the state that the state either sells or donates or leases or rents or whatever to the federal government for building of forts, but they can reserve some rights over those lands as long as those rights don't conflict with the federal constitution. So in Texas Jurisprudence Third Edition, it says something like the Republic of Texas still exists. It's only abrogated insofar as it conflicts with federal authority. So that federal authority still exists only on the federal lands or the federal people when they're traveling in between federal lands or to the seat of government. And the state is allowed to have some jurisdiction over those federal lands as long as they don't compete with or um, conflict with the federal things the federal government, according to the Constitution, is agreed upon that they can do on federal lands without state interference. Okay, but the purpose of this video, I just wanted to go over like forts and the type of forts. So, like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state, which all shall be the same for the erection of forts, generally forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings in relation to military purposes. So, what is a fort? This is an old, like encyclopedic dictionary or something that I have, and it goes over forts and fortifications. So, I'm going to read this. I'm just going to kind of read this. And it's not really important that we memorize what every single type of fort is, just so long as we are vaguely familiar with what fort and fortification is as related to the military. I have this word highlighted here because defense is spelled with a C normally, and that's the way it's spelled in the Constitution. And defense with an S comes from another language, I think French, and it means something slightly different. Basically, it's the same, but it's slightly different. And so, defense, Old English spelled with a C, French or New English spelled with an S. And I think it's because the meanings are somewhat different. So fortifications and posts and the entire federal government, at least insofar as Article 1 and 2, are, and most of the amendments are for what the federal government as a national military will not do, or what they will do, or what the states won't interfere with them doing on the federal lands. So fortification is the art of fortifying a town or other place, or of putting in such a posture of defense that every one of its parts defends and is defended by some other parts by means of ramparts, parapets, ditches, and other outworks, to the end that a small number of men within may be also, or may be able to defend themselves for a considerable time. And I'm sorry if you can't read this, this is the best copy I have. Against the assaults of a numerous army without, so that the enemy, in attacking them, must of necessity suffer great loss. The term fortification, which comes from the Latin word forticatio, okay, fortificatio, a derivative of fortifico, that is compounded of fortis and fascio. Okay, so fascio is like a bunch of things tied together, tightly bound, and signifies to fortify or strengthen, is made use of to denote not only the science or art of fortifying, as in the phrases, he has studied fortification, he understands fortification well, but also a place fortified, and the works themselves, as in the phrase, the fortifications of such a place consist of 6 bastions with outworks, and likewise the very act itself of fortifying, as when it is said, they are at work on the fortifications of such a place, that fortifications will be attended with much expense, etc. So this is what I've been telling people, that the federal works, and Eisenhower did some reports. He commissioned, he put together a committee and commissioned the officers to do these reports on the jurisdiction of the federal government and how those reports came out. And what they said was the states give some lands to the federal government to build military posts, and those constitutional things are the things that the military does on those lands, that the states will not interfere with those military things shown in the Constitution on those lands. And it's a relationship between what the federal government does and what the state does, and that the state doesn't interfere, agrees that when they ratified the federal constitution, that they agreed that they were not going to interfere with the federal works going on the federal lands. Fortification may be divided into ancient and modern, offensive and defensive, regular and irregular, like the military, natural and artificial, etc. And this includes all sorts of uh, deceptions. Deceptions is a military right, because their job is to protect and they have to do it at all cost. Recently, it was a rebel capitalist that came out and said that there was a media outlet that's been paid, like, I don't know, millions or billions of dollars by the United States to put out false information. And I'm sure that there's several of them, there's many of them. But that's one of the things that the federal government does as a military state, is to put out false information and pay the media to put it out there. Then we have ancient fortifications. At first consisted of walls or defenses made of the trunks and branches of trees mixed with earth for security against the attacks of an enemy. Invention owes its origin to necessity. Fortification seems to have had for its basis. Oh, fear for its basis, had fear for its basis. For when man had no other enemy but the wild beast, the walls of his cottage were his security. But when pride, ambition, and avarice had possessed the minds of the strong and the daring to commit violences upon their weaker neighbors, either to subject them to new laws or to plunder their little inheritance, it was natural for the latter to contrive how to defend themselves from such injuries, which is basically what we have now. We've had corporations take over the federal government, call themselves federally qualified, sitting in constitutionally created offices, not following the Constitution and calling themselves government, and they're not. It's basically just been plundered and taken over um, the same way they did in ancient times. Whoever has been in North America may have seen fortification in its infancy. There are abundance of Indian villages fenced round by long stakes driven into the ground, with moss or earth to fill the intervals, and this is their security, together with their own vigilance, against the cruelty of the savage neighboring nations. Nor is fortification much less ancient than mankind. For Cain, the son of Adam, built a city with a wall around it upon Mount Liban, and called it after the name of his son Enoch, the ruins of which, it is said, are to be seen to this day. And the Babylonians, soon after the deluge, built cities and encompassed them with strong walls. At first, people thought themselves safe enough with a single wall, behind which they made use of their darts and arrows with safety. But as other warlike instruments were continually invented to destroy these feeble structures, so on the other hand, persons acting on the defensive were obliged to build stronger and stronger to resist the new contrived forces of the desperate assailants. What improvements they made in strengthening their walls many ages ago appear from history. The first walls we ever read of, and which were built by Cain, were of brick, and the ancient Grecians, long before Rome was ever thought of, used brick and rubble stone, with which they built a vast wall joining Mount Hymettus to the city of Athens. Babylonian walls built by Sem- Semir, Semir, Semiramis. This is, I'm sorry, this paper's just kind of hard to read. Or as others will have it, by Baylus, were 32 feet thick, 100 feet high, and towers 10 feet higher, built upon them, cemented with bitumen or asphaltus. Those of Jerusalem seem to have come but little short of them, since in the siege by Titus, all the Roman battering rams, joined with Roman art and courage, could remove but 4 stones out of the tower of Antonia in a whole night's assault. After fortification had arrived at this height, it stopped for many ages until the discovery of gunpowder, the invention of guns, and the application of both to military purposes, and then the round and square towers, which were very good uh, flanks against bows and arrows, became but indifferent ones against the violence of cannons. Nor did the battlements any longer offer a hiding place. When the force of one shot both overset the battlement and destroyed those who sought security from it. Modern fortification is the way of defense now used, turning the walls into ramparts, and square and round towers into bastions defended by numerous outworks, all which are made so solid that they cannot be beat down, but by the continual fire of several batteries of cannons. These bastions at first were but small, their gorges narrow, their flanks and faces short, and at great distance from each other are as are those now to be seen in the city of Antwerp, built in 1540 by Charles V, Emperor of Germany, for the invariable practice then, and for some time after the introduction of them, was to attack the curtains and not the faces of the um, bastions. But since that time, they have been greatly improved and enlarged, and are now arrived to the degree of strength that it is almost a received opinion that the art of fortification is at its height. Ha ha ha. Yeah, this was like 300 years ago. And incapable of being to a much greater perfection, according to Mr. Glennie, page 9, military construction. This opinion does not seem founded on truth. Offensive fortification shows how to besiege and take fortified places. It further teaches a general how to take all advantages for his troops, the manner of encamping, and method of carrying on either a regular or irregular siege according as circumstances may direct. A defensive fortification shows a governor how to make the most of a garrison committed to his care and to provide all things necessary for its defense. Regular fortification is that which is erected according to the rules of art on a construction made from a figure or polygon that is regular or has all its side and angles equal. The flanked or salient angles in such a fortification are equal to one another, equally distant from one another, and are each of them at the distance of about that of serious musket shot from the flanks, which defend it. For an irregular fortification having the flanked angles, as also the flank and lines of defense unequal, may be constructed from the sides of a regular polygon as well as from those of an irregular polygon, by drawing the perpendiculars to the regular polygon from points different from those of their bisections. See Glennie's general rule for irregular construction. Irregular construction or irregular fortifications, on the contrary, is that where the sides and angles are not uniform, equidistant, or equal, which is owing to the irregularity of the ground, valleys, rivers, hills, and the like. Natural fortification is the strength and security which nature herself has afforded to places by the advantages of the situations and the difficulties in approaching them. It has artificial fortifications, but that's where my page ends. You get the idea of what fortifications are, and that according to the reports put out by Eisenhower and according to what the Constitution says, if you read it, that there's two jurisdictions attached to land in which the federal government makes laws for, and then there are the laws for bankruptcies and things like that. So it's to borrow money on the credit of the United States, not the United States of America or the states. Um, Regulate commerce with foreign nations, meaning that they will keep the peace so that commerce can be flow freely, and not to stop commerce or hinder commerce by making a whole bunch of rules that people have to follow to have commerce with other nations. It's according to, I believe, Judge Napolitano has said that regulate had a different meaning then than what we believe it is now. Regulate does not mean making more rules. It means making sure there's not more rules so that it can be done freely. So there's things in here that the Congress can do to help the states um, be at peace with one another and stay friendly with one another. But then the rest of the things are what they're going to do on the federal lands for the states to keep the states free, sovereign, and independent with all rights, powers, and jurisdiction. They had to give up some and give them to the agency that they created, which is a national government. Or the national government, actually, going over some old stuff that I sent to a friend, is the government of the people, whereas the central, I think, was the states, and then the general was the military. So like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned. There's a lot of stuff coming out this year by people. They're starting to say things, and some of the things they're saying are the things that I've been saying. I've showed you the book where it tells us that the federal government, as a military government, is allowed to use deceptive practices because they're there to keep the peace as a national military, and the military is allowed to use deceptive practices to keep that peace and keep us safe. I don't think that the military government and the states, the government created by the states, are quite the same thing, and they both quote the Constitution. There's only one of them that can use the Constitution, and that's the national government. The states can use it to make sure that they give money to the federal government to fund all these things, but they have to say exactly where all the money is going. So it's the states that's giving money to the military government so that the military government can turn around and, as Rebel Capitalist said, give that money to media to put out all these messages. So they're either doing it without the state's permission or they're getting the money directly from the states. Either way, the states and the representatives that we've been sending to the United States of America and Congress assembled, which is not the United States and Congress assembled, um, they've been slacking on their jobs, and that's just putting it nicely. So yeah, this is a federal constitution, and this was just from a like an encyclopedia or something on my research for the word defense with the C. So please like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned. Stuff's happening. It's gonna happen fast. Pay attention.